All right, welcome to episode 63 of the PoddyC. We are back from the race to World First, which was a bit of a funny one this tier. Kind of a big ramp up and then a short drop off the cliff at the end. But overall, I think still obviously great experience for me and great experience for Max as well. Dorki, what was it like watching the race or being in the community during the race this time?
Oh, dude, super mixed opinions. Yeah, first of all, congrats to you guys. Congrats to Max for winning, and congrats to Dranos for a successful casting event once again.
Thank you.
But yeah, so I actually had a lot of opinions about this race, or I guess this raid, not race, last year, or not last year, God, last week. But my opinion has almost entirely changed this week. So I came into last week thinking, oh, this is going to be the most overtuned, worst raid ever. We're already seeing the fourth and fifth boss take like 100-something pulls. I automatically assumed that one Armed Bandit would be like a 200 pull boss. Muggsy was probably going to be like 300, and Gallywix was going to be a 400. And now that we are 5 out of 6, we killed Sprocket yesterday. My opinion has changed drastically about this raid. But going back to your question, you were saying from a viewer experience, it was a pretty shitty raid.
Like a bad race to watch?
It was pretty unenjoyable to watch.
Yeah.
Like there were so many splits going on. Like even on the final week, you guys were doing splits, right, Max?
That's happened in the past, like non-Nerebar Palace simultaneous release. The Tuesday of the second reset, you almost always do a bunch more splits. It doesn't usually take the whole day. And I'm pretty sure like our that Tuesday was splits all day long, and then we like re-killed 4 Mythic bosses and then went to bed. And I think Echo's first day of the second reset, they didn't even pull Mythic, right? Like there's definitely more splits than there ever has been. There's like a ramping, there's like this you can always do more thing. And then we had a full heroic week in Nerebar Palace, so we made a bunch more characters. And then that just kind of transferred into this raid. And I don't know if it was even worth it, but like having as much gear as possible is always the idea. So yeah, splits fucking suck. And the simultaneous release is terrible for the race to World First, but I doubt the race to World First is the reason why it does or doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think you guys were even doing splits. Was it after One Armed Bandit? It might have been. I don't remember when exactly it was.
There's always more. I think we did like 3.5 days of splits. I think we went into Mythic like after lunch on Friday, but then we started Saturday with 3 hours of Mythic Plus. We did assorted other splits. If our power didn't go out at the end of week 1, we would have probably done a couple 2 8 of 8 Mythics for people that we were going to use next week, and we just didn't have the time. So yeah, there was just a lot of gearing. This raid seemed worse than others too, because there was certainly just more pieces that you had to have from raid this tier than others, and they weren't all very rare, but like all of the trinket, like everyone needed House of Cards, everyone needed Eye of Kazan, everyone needed Jasper Diamond, everyone needed, Best in Slot or whatever. Like they needed so many things to where you didn't just need a good character with tier and high heroic eye level pieces. In fact, a lot of times we killed like the first 4 Mythic bosses with like very low eye level, like people were wearing way old stuff. And just because you needed, at least on normal, you just needed all of these pieces. So it was a lot worse than normal for sure.
Yeah, I think that for the average guild, it's an interesting spot because I think now that they've nerfed Sprocket and Stix, the raid looks kind of fine.
Did they nerf Sprocket?
Oh, they took Sprocket out back, and
nerfs.
they took that boss and they demolished it. Do you want to read the notes on it? Actually, it is
I am unaware.
One of the most brutal slayings of a boss to ever happen.
No, there's no way it's the most brutal slaying.
It's pretty big. Like for a 1 week big. Change to
where can I find this?
To a boss? Yeah, I'll put him up. Hang on.
Okay.
I
mean, it's probably right. I mean, like Sprocketmonger is in the like Brood Twister area of the raid. It's the 5th boss, even though it's non-linear. And I mean, they took Brood Twister out back, and Sprocketmonger is every bit as hard as Brood Twister was. So it would kind of let you think that they.
So okay, health reduced by 13%, polarization generator damage reduced by 12.5, unstable explosion 17.5, rocket barrage 25, void splash 33, polarization blast reduced by 30, and duration reduced by 25. Reduce the number of rockets by 20%. Reduce the number of void orbs by 29%.
I mean, that back part doesn't even matter. So I saw, I didn't read what the nerfs were, but I heard ID in their reclear yesterday killed Sprocketmonger before it did the first set of balls.
So did we.
Like,
yeah.
The Sprocketmonger is just like, I mean, just like we spent like 80 pulls in the last phase.
Yeah.
Right. So like most of the difficulty was there, and now you just completely skip it, which I mean is certainly good. I mean, yeah. So the difficulty curve of the raid now is crazy. Now that Stix and Sprocketmonger are nerfed, it's like a couple pulls for Rick. Probably, I'm going to guess like 20, 30 pulls
for Stix, yeah.
For Stix, maybe
these bosses are still pretty challenging. Well, at least for my guild. I assume it's probably going to be worse for guilds that are worse than mine.
So I think Stix is now once again quite a bit harder than Sprocket after these nerfs to Sprocket.
Okay.
Because like you still have a pretty big fail case of if a ball rolls into a bomb shell, it's not like over, but it's pretty over for guilds that are doing that right now.
Yeah,
take a couple.
But bombs are still hard to kill too.
Yeah.
By a very comp dependent.
It's comp. Yeah, exactly. Like if you can't field some extra Shadow Priests or Moonkins or whatever, you're going to be in trouble.
Or Fire Mages, but Fire Mages relies on tanks,
right?
Like moving the boss properly. But yeah, the health's been nerfed so much that like basically it makes sense for all melee to just like get off the boss and swap to the bombshells and break them and then get back on.
Yeah, not to mention the blood DK. So it is a very comp restrictive fight where if you're trying to do it with like without a blood DK, without a Moonkin, with like one Shadow Priest, it's still gonna be maybe 50
I have
balls.
A theory. This may not be the time for it, but I think progressing Stix without a blood DK will actually be easier. So there's a lot of, we wiped a lot to gripping the bombshells. They have a really, really weird hitbox. Like basically during the grip, anywhere in the grip, including their original location, if you were to run over it, it would blow up. Some very weird positioning thing. And when people are trying to go into the back of the boss, they don't know if it's going to be gripped or when, so you have to hard avoid it. And if they were never to be gripped, they have a very obvious like kite direction and they're not very fast, so it's easy to avoid them. So I would actually be willing to wager that is just because of the nerfs, when you knock the bombshells off, they're going to get into the raid and die. You're not worried about killing them fast enough. So gripping, I don't think really matters. And I think gripping is a big wipe causer. Like it was a huge wipe causer for us. And near the end of the progression on that boss for World First, I was like, we could just sit DK if we wanted to, because I'm pretty sure gripping is causing more wipes than it is solving. So just a thought. So if you guys don't have a blood DK, I'm pretty sure the hardest person's job is the junk roller people, the people in the balls. And their job, in my opinion, becomes a lot easier when you take grips out of the fight entirely. Just a thought.
Interesting.
Yeah, interesting. We haven't had too much issues with that in our guild, but I could imagine a lot of guilds struggling with that. Yeah, so far, these bosses have taken my guild still quite a bit amount of pulls compared to the usual 3rd, 4th, and 5th boss. Like, I think Rake was like 30-something pulls. I mean, granted, we were a lower item level at the time when we killed it for the first time. Stix was like 60, 70-ish, and half of them were pre-nerf. I would say like more than half of them were pre-nerf. Sprocket was like 50 around, and now we're on one Armed Bandit. But I've actually been really enjoying how it feels to have more challenging earlier bosses. Like, I actually like the idea of all the bosses taking less than 100 pulls, but not be complete pushover.
Yeah, but starting that earlier.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Like,
I actually,
because like, there's been a lot of complaints about how the later bosses are too easy or like too undertuned or whatever. But I'm not too like, I haven't gotten there yet, but I'm not too pessimistic about it, because like this is kind of what I've been asking for, right? Like, I just want a bunch of bosses that are less than 100 pulls, but aren't going to be a complete pushover. Like, you get to do different bosses, you get to like feel meaningful progression instead of just being hard stuck at a boss for like 300 pulls.
I mean,
I think it's good as well. Yeah. Go ahead.
You say what you're going to say, Dranos. You wanted to cut in before.
I feel like it's fine if the race has them overtuned as well and they fix it fast. Like, I don't know. People were complaining about Stix and Sprocket, and I think there's sort of a reasonable fear that Blizzard's going to leave them like that because they sometimes do. But as long as they do nerf them at this speed, I actually also think that it's totally fine to have like really hard Race to World First boss 4 and 5, and then nerf them for normal guilds so that they're medium hard boss 4 and 5. I agree with you, Dorki. That's fun. Where I disagree is I don't think an end boss can be as easy as Gallywix and be satisfying for a lot of people. I think that's just too like bad.
Yeah, I mean, so I've seen these arguments a lot. I think there's a middle ground. So like we've gotten used to the last bosses being pretty fucking insane over the last couple of years, right? So you have Queen Ansurek, insanely hard, right? You have Fyrak, insanely hard. Those two bosses are actually both top 5 hardest bosses of all time. And then you go back one raid, you have Sarkareth, that's a 7.5 minute boss with the crest system being OP. That boss got killed in about the same amount of pulls as Gallywix did, actually. And then you have, but go before that, say Sarkareth's an outlier. You have Razageth, which was so overtuned, it had to be nerfed like 5 times. And even then, I think the overall pull count at the end was pretty high, even though it died really fast after the last nerf. And before that is Jailer, right? But before Jailer, you had what I think is the middle ground. You had Sylvanas. Sorry, there's a leaf blower directly outside my window.
I don't hear it, so
Holy
hopefully
you guys don't hear it? Oh, cool. If you don't hear it, then I'm just going to keep on talking.
Oh, now I hear it.
Going, yeah.
So, okay.
But keep going, yeah. Frank will fix it in post. Yeah. He loves cutting out leaf blowers.
I don't want to make him do that. I'm just going to let this very loud leaf blower man go by, and I remember my train of thought, and he'll just piece the two together. It'll be amazing.
Okay.
And before Jailer, which was another insane boss. So it's been like basically 5 raids in a row of outside of anomalies. The end bosses are like 300, 400 pull beasts, right? But before that, you had Sylvanas, it was like 200 pulls. You had Sire Denathrius, was 130 pulls for us, and I think was kind of consistently 130 to 150, like throughout all of farm, right? So I think an end boss, I think being 50 pulls, which I think is going to be the average for most people on Gallywix, because like you saw Echo do it at that level with like full strat, but also Echo's really fucking good. And like there wasn't really like a gear check for that. So like you having more gear isn't going to necessarily make Gallywix much easier, right? Like there wasn't really a lot of optimization checks that were there. So like 50 pulls will be good for you, and maybe it's like a little higher than that. But I like Dorki, I think 400 pull end bosses for the average player, that's insane. That would actually go ahead and say that's just not okay. Like, I don't think that's good for the game. I think that burns people. I think there's just a certain amount of pulls you can do on a boss where no matter how gratifying it is when you kill it, it's just too much. And that number is probably that. But I think there's a number within like 100 to 200 that has been like, people didn't complain about Denathrius, and Denathrius didn't die in 50 pulls, right? I think end bosses being a little harder than they are now, like, but also I don't think Gallywix was intentional. I'd be willing to bet a lot, and I'm sure this will be asked in some interviews, that like clearly something went massively wrong on Gallywix, and we can probably talk about that a little bit too. But the overall curve should be nice though, because like if you're doing Sprocket in 50, Stix in 50, Armed Bandit in 50, Mugsy's very hard and very comp dependent, so probably 100 hundo plus easily. Like we killed that boss in 150 pulls, and I think we smoked that boss. Like we maybe had like 15 wipes to bugs at the end, but like we did really, really well to do that. And then Gallywix being 50 to 100 for most guilds, like I think it's going to at least be, even if you look at this tier as a failure, if you're one of those people, which I don't know how many people who are playing the game that feel that way. I feel like a lot of those people are viewers that
I think like it was
play.
A bad race,
100%.
but it'll be a good tier to play.
Yeah, exactly. And I think just like most things, like AUG, did they need to nerf AUG as much as they did? No. AUG is like, if AUG isn't good, buffing Boomkins on Stix, it's unplayably bad all the time, right? So like, did they need to make it that bad? No, but they've been really good since they've been released for years, and it's like, could they be really bad for just one patch? They can, and that's okay, right? Just like most other classes go through that, unless you're a mage. And that is something that has to happen, right? So like, if they do one raid, intentional or not, where like it's actually not going to take that long, I think that's going to be a good little science good little test, to see what kind of interaction you get with the raid and see how people like that. Because I think it's possible that can be something that people really like, and that doesn't necessarily mean making the race worse. Like Dratno said, you can have Stix and Sprocket, which again, I think they did not intend them to be that hard even for us. But you can have those bosses almost immediately be made regular for people, right? And as long as they do that in a timely manner, I think that it works.
You could do it with an end boss as well. Like Ansarek was giga hard, and then they nerfed it to be medium giga hard, but it was still. But they could have just nerfed it by more the week that they like nerfed it for non-raced world first guilds, and like that sort of like it's possible to overshoot and make the race to world first like nuclear difficulty, and then fix it you can fix it in time for everybody else, because by definition of it being the race to world first, only a couple of guilds are on it, and then you can have it be, you can leave it for a week or something if it's an end boss, and then shoot it. But I think for me that the raid looks like it's going to be a good one overall, pending probably a Mugsy nerf at some point in the next couple of weeks. I do think that the comp restriction side of this tier though is still going to be a stain against it, even though the difficulty is down. Like the fact that Moonkins on Stix, Shadow Priests on Bandit, Mages on the last two make your life so much easier on those fights, to the extent that they do, and to the stackability that they do, I think is going to be something bad about this tier. But I still think it'll be maybe an above average tier to play, despite being probably like a bottom 20th percentile race.
What is it on heroic? What is the general vibe of people that, I mean, the majority of the rating audience, their end goal is AOTC or less, right? So like, have you guys put out a vibe check of how people feel about the raid on heroic?
No clue.
It seems good, but it's just the raid itself is a little bit too cluttered. It's too visually noisy. There's too much happening,
Yeah.
Especially when you're doing like, so what I said last week was this raid feels like there's so much happening, but nothing matters at the same time. You get what I'm saying? Like if you look at Sprocket Monger, there are so many mechanics on Heroic that just like straight up don't matter, but they're just like there to add noise to your screen. And it just like even Vade was talking about that, because when he was pugging Mugsy, it's like chaos is happening, and then like it just like randomly starts raining too, but none of it really kills you. So it just feels like there's a lot of stuff happening.
Yeah, the last few on heroic do have a couple of like if you do mines wrong on Mugsy, you're gonna wipe, right? But like most other stuff is kind of fine. There's not almost any wipe on Mugsy is gonna involve mines going wrong, right? Heroic, which is weird, right? It sort of feels like on Mythic as well. Like there are some bosses where it's just like the difficulty is extremely loaded into one or two mechanics in a way that feels wrong. I would look at Sprocketmonger as an example of this as well. Sprocketmonger Mythic is all about the Void Orbs until they nerfed it so that now it's all about killing it before the Void Orbs. But like that mechanic is 200 times more lethal than any other mechanic on that fight or ever on a fifth boss. It's like one person gets hit by a Void Orb, you're almost dead. Two people, it's over, right? It's a wipe. And that's like so, I don't know, strange. It just does feel wrong.
It feels like they've added a lot of swirlies for the sake of having swirlies.
I do love the swirly visibility update.
So I was thinking about this. It's like a chicken or the egg issue. Do you think they made the bosses so like dodge and soak intensive with the new swirlies because of the new swirly system? Or do you think that someone in like the early testing cycle looked at the design of these bosses and they were like, if we were ever going to do a new swirly system, it has to be right now. Like it has to exist before this raid goes live. I actually wonder which one. I mean, it's probably the first one, but it could be the second one. There's so many.
Also, do you think that people complaining about this raid being swirly heavy are just people that wouldn't have noticed them in the previous tiers because they were harder to see?
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I thought about that too, and I tried looking back to older raids. And it feels like there's nothing happening in older raids. Like I tried looking at Argus, like a World First Argus kill. There's like so much less swirlies happening. It's kind of just like, all right, there's the mechanic. There are the things you need to know to do. and that was it. It wasn't like, all right, so there's a mechanic happening, but at the same time, there are lines you gotta dodge, and there are swirlies, and there are stuff coming at you.
I mean, 90% of it's Gallywix, right? Like Gallywix just has. I would be willing to bet that Gallywix has maybe double the swirlies of any other boss that's ever existed. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
even on heroic, it's like
Yeah,
got
like
the same amount on heroic as mythic.
After every tank mechanic, there's red circles all over the room. Every time you run away for suppression, half the raid is like having fire trail them. Like there is circles all the time.
I honestly feel that way about most of the bosses, though. Like even the second boss, like Carnage or whatever.
Oh yeah, during the
Even
clash.
that boss. I mean, even like before the clash is happening, right? Like there's waves coming at you, but at the same time, there's like a frontal somewhere to the side, and there's like circles spawning, and you have to spread. And it just feels like kind of a lot going on. Not that it's all lethal.
Yeah. I mean, I that one specifically, Cauldron of Carnage, like when you look at the intermission, you're like, if you care about gameplay and visual clarity, you're like, this was not. But I think Blizzard, like, they're like, this is the second boss. Aesthetically, that boss like is a very memorable thing from the raid. So I think like they just went all in on that, just looking super cool, even though it was way too bright and there was way too many things happening. But I think that's also another boss where they're like, hey, we have a new swirly system. We can make them different colors as well, you know, like the red and blue. I think overall it ended up. I think the new swirlies are a massive success though. Like in dungeons and in raids, like going forward, I think that's like one of the better things they've updated or added to the game in a long time, like up on the tiers with like the ping system. I think is just like something that needed to be modernized.
Yeah, I do
I
think it's
agree.
the best thing they've added. So going back to the whole difficulty curve, I didn't have a lot I want to say about it. So first of all, thank you, Max, for saying that 400 plus polls is not okay. That should not be the norm whatsoever. Because I do fear with all the backlash we're getting from the Race to World First fans that Blizzard might see like, oh, next year we have to crank it up. I do. I mean, like you are right, Dranos. As long as they quickly nerf these fights, it'll be fine. The problem is like for the longest time, Blizzard
Yeah,
has taken forever to
that is the big problem,
make
right? Is
these.
like
Yeah,
if something has like an 80% chance of getting nerfed timely and 20% of not, it's so bad when they decide to just leave it for a month.
yeah, they've done such a good job this time around where it's like these bosses immediately got chopped in half and they actually feel playable. Because before it was like, all right, if you were a Mythic rating guild, you just got to these bosses and then you had to AFK. Like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna go do Mythic splits, or you'll just prog on a boss for hundreds of pulls until Blizzard decides to finally do something about it. Like that has always felt awful, and I
We did a
understand where
mythic
you're
split
coming
this
from. Where you're
tier.
like, you did that.
Yeah,
That is disgusting.
not like a
That's
full one, but
crazy.
we did the 2 out of 8 that Max like that Liquid was going to do, where it's like, okay, it's Monday, we could pull, and from our spot, it's like we have Stix at 50% or whatever. We know we are nowhere close to this enraged jack. We're down like a Moonkin and a Shadow Priest from that. Let's just gear all of our unsaved guys. Then 2 out of 8.
Yeah, yeah, and the second thing is like, I don't have an opinion on Gallywix yet, but if I were to just take a random guess, I would say that boss is probably still going to be pretty challenging for most players because most players can't really field 4 mages and like 5 monks, and we don't have the same skill level as the top players, right? So I don't necessarily know if it'll be something that'll be like 50 pulls or less. So, like I imagine it's still gonna be over 100 pulls, and I feel that's completely okay. Because I mean, Hot Pot Hero, those guys took like 108 pulls or something. They're world fourth. I
Yeah,
would be
Method
curious
also
to
took
see how.
a bunch of pulls, right?
Yeah. So like it seems like Echo was kind of an anomaly. I mean, they
Yeah, some
obviously
might
are
say that
because
guild's really
they are
good.
Echo. Yeah, some might say
Yeah,
they're really good. I don't know if we would consider them the best, but they're pretty good.
definitely
But
top 2.
anyway, yeah, definitely top two. Anyways, I don't feel like there's an issue with having a boss take over 100, like just under 200 or like slightly over 100. Because like we look at Castle Nafria, one of the most well-regarded raids, and it had some of the shittiest difficulty curve, didn't it? Like we had SOG take double the amount of pulls as Sire Denafrius, and Sire Denafrius was considered the S tier boss, like everyone's favorite, right? Like you guys had it ranked S tier in your tier lists, right? So I don't really buy the whole Gallywix is a terrible boss, or like Blizzard should be ashamed of themselves for creating this boss, because that just seems like a boogeyman, or like maybe we're just too conditioned by these past few raids to feel again, like I don't really know. I'm kind of just making shit up because I haven't done Gallywix myself, so maybe my opinion will completely change by the time I get to Gallywix. But I just don't think it'll be as easy as it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I also haven't pulled it, but from watching it, I don't know. It felt. This has been my take on the boss. It just feels like the pacing of abilities is not Mythic. Like, I don't know, Max, you talked about pulling Tindril PTR and being like, oh, this boss is going to be super easy. And then on Mythic, it came out and it was casting like 50% faster. It feels like Gallywix is just missing that, like, pacing to it, where it's just every time it does an ability, it just does the ability. And then 5 seconds later, it does the next ability rather than ever like doing a hard overlap on Mythic. Is that a fair assessment of why it's so easy?
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I was bored today and I was making raid plans for Gallywix about how we would deal with every single mechanic being like mythicified, right? Like, so the suppression being twice as big, the group soaks either happening at the exact same time or in very quick succession involving all 20 people instead of 10, and things. And I was just thinking about like how you would deal with a fight like that, and it seemed like the amount of thinking that normally goes into like a regular end boss. And yeah, I mean, it does seem like that. My theory, we learned recently that when they make bosses, they make them on heroic, and then they make them harder for mythic, and they make them easier for normal. They don't make mythic bosses and then make them 2 steps easier and 1 step easier. They make heroic bosses. This is the first time, I believe, ever where the mythic version of an end boss is completely different than the heroic version, meaning that they basically made a new fight on mythic. And every other time they make a new fight, they make it on heroic. So I wonder if the reason it felt like kind of it was definitely, calling this a heroic boss is completely disingenuous, but like,
yeah,
like, you know, some of the mechanics did feel like heroic spacing rather than, like Dratno said, the mythic feeling of like how Tindril turned out, where they're just rapid firing things at you. Like, this boss didn't feel that way, and I wonder. My first theory is I wonder if it's just what happens. It's a fault of just making a boss and it erring on the side of being easier, because every other time they make a boss, they're not making a mythic boss. And also, this is the first time ever they've had basically the entire boss not being a dungeon journal, which, by the way, very, very fucking cool if you're exactly us and no one else, because it's the same thing of just following a video. But for us, it was really, really fucking cool. Maybe they thought that, like, there's a lot of added difficulty without a dungeon journal. So maybe they thought they didn't need to make the boss as difficult, because part of the difficulty is going to be figuring it out. And they just don't realize how good we are at stuff like that. Or they nerf the boss's HP. I know, like, nerfs before you see a boss doesn't really matter. Like, if you really want to track that in like every raid, bosses are buffed after we're in the raid, like before we get to them, constantly nerfed, buffed. Like, that happens all the time. But like, maybe a theory this raid that might not be wrong is they saw Stix and Sprocket take the entire first week. That's never happened before. We've never ended a first reset without killing basically the second to last boss, or at least the one right before it. And this one was like totally different. So I think they panicked and they were like, we can't have this race go to the third reset. We don't want that 3% buff coming into play. So like, basically from the early part of week 2, they just made the last bosses a bit easier, which is trackable with nerfs. Like, that could have been the idea. They were kind of afraid of the race going too long because of the obvious misstep on their end with Sprocket and Stix's tuning. It was maybe a combination of all those factors, but I also still don't think they missed as much as people think they did. And I know a lot of that is like race viewers being like, we weren't given this Echo and Liquid pulling the last boss at the same time, having it low, like the dream, right? And I think that's a lot of it, even though last raid was not close at all, and it was like the hardest raid of all time. So I don't think
it looked closer, though, in the sense of like, oh, Echo 40%, Liquid 10%, right? Like, if you were a low information viewer, you could think it was close still then.
Yeah, maybe.
Whereas this was like Echo were asleep and Liquid just killed the boss, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I think I've heard this boss compared to like Xavius. So I think
is ridiculous.
It's definitely ridiculous. So all of Emerald Nightmare in total, including like a 5-hour scenarios thing, was killed in 15 hours. It took us 15 hours of progression to kill Gallywix, right? So a lot more than that. I would also say Sarkareth. It took us almost the same time to progress Sarkareth actually as it did Gallywix. And I think if Echo logged in on Sarkareth with our entire strat and not having to come up with their own, right? Like obviously that was the difference in 50 pulls on Gallywix. You can see how that can change your pull count. Like I think they would have done Sarkareth in a very similar amount of pulls. I think this boss is very comparable to Sarkareth. I think we killed it within 15 pulls of it, and I think given the same circumstances, it would have been killed in much fewer, certainly sub 100 by Echo afterwards. Maybe the Xavius comparison makes sense. I actually think this boss is maybe more egregious than Xavius in that Xavius was supposed to be easy. Like Emerald Nightmare, Highmaul, Mogishan Vaults, they were supposed to be easy raids. They were not supposed to be what this raid was, or Nerebar Palace, or Uldir, or any of the other first raids that for a while, Castle Nathria, right? In a way, this one missed more because I think this was missed its target by a lot more than Xavius ever did. I think Xavius, like, if anything, like barely missed its target. And this one maybe missed it by a lot from what they wanted. I don't know. I am the only thing I know for sure about this boss is it's just going to be another one of those bosses where we like loved progression on this fight. We obviously wish it was like a little harder, but like it was really really fun. Like that was some of the most fun I've ever had. Then they should. I know it's maybe bad sample size because the one time they did this, the tuning was bad, but doing the end boss with the no dungeon journal thing on Mythic goes crazy. Like that was so sick. And if it's ever a closer race where both guilds are doing that at the same time, I think it'd be like just peak interesting, and also doesn't change anything for the average player, because I think regardless of the end boss dungeon journal, when any other guild gets there, they're going straight to our kill video, right? They're not dissecting the dungeon journal. It doesn't change anything for anyone else. It just makes what we're doing way cooler.
Yeah, if anything, they should put the abilities back in the dungeon journal now so that it's less annoying to like have to search all the abilities on Wowhead or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I sometimes do. I sometimes you look through and you see a thing that killed you on the thing, and you're like, oh, what is this? Oh, that has a knockback associated or whatever. But yeah, I think that it's a cool concept, and I do think that it's probably just a case of if they don't nerf this, it'll probably be like Sarkareth was a pretty popular boss among cutting edge guilds that tier.
Yeah, exactly. And Castle Nathria.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't pulled it yet, so I suspect I'm going to be left a little bit wanting of like a slightly harder boss. But I agree with you that like I don't want it to be Ansarek every tier. I don't want it to be Jailer every tier. Like I think that
and it's been a long time. Like outside of anomalies with Sarkareth, it has been years since we have not gotten a boss on the Jailer or Fyrak or Ansarek end boss level difficulty. That is clearly or has been their target.
So I think lowering the target is good. I just don't think by quite as much as Gallywix lowers it. At least if you're going to do that as well. Like, I mean, I think it's clear that it's a miss because Mugsy is harder than Gallywix, and like that.
Yeah, Mugsy's a very normal difficulty for a second to last boss. They didn't miss on that at all.
Right. So if you think that Gallywix should be this easy, you need to also think that Mugsy needs to be like 3 times easier than it is, which I guess that is a consistent and fair viewpoint that I think a lot of people probably will hold, but at least it proves that like the entire tier's difficulty curve wasn't a masterclass, right? Either they were wrong on Gallywix or Mugsy. I think probably a little bit of both. Like I think Mugsy could maybe be a little bit easier, definitely less buggy and class stack valuing, like the Ignite. Their decisions surrounding the goons and AoE and Ignite and stuff clearly weren't really well thought out because they changed them week 1 of Heroic, how that mob functioned. So I think they didn't understand how that ability was going to get played, and it doesn't play out like it did on Mythic. I also think Sprocketmonger is a good example of like they made the fight hard because of one mechanic, the Void Orbs, and then they nerfed it by making the health lower so you don't get there, rather than by making that mechanic easier.
Wait, hold on. We need to calm down there for a second, Dreddles. I think it's only a couple of guilds that probably don't make it to those Void Orbs, because we made it to the Void Orbs last night.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, I guess they did make them a lot easier. I think they should have nerfed the Void Orbs by more and the rest of the fight by less is basically my take on Sprocket. Like, they nerfed Void Splash by 33% and the number of Void Orbs by 29%, and I think you could double both of those numbers.
I would heavily agree with that. I think the Void Orbs are like so exponentially harder than anything else in the fight. It's like a different difficulty.
Yeah, so I think that because I think that you could nerf that by more. You could still take some health off the thing, but like I don't know. I don't think you need to necessarily nerf unstable explosion damage, for instance, or polarization blast. Like I think those mechanics are fine to be And actually, I think the knockback is another one. You can nerf the duration of the knockback so that you don't get screwed for gatewaying early. But other than that, yeah.
What's your? I've seen a lot of very interesting takes on this, but what is your all's take on the secret phase?
I don't even know what it is.
So like, or I guess maybe what are your takes on secret phases in general? Are you a fan? Should they do more of them? Should they do less of them?
Okay, my take is that there hasn't been a secret phase since Legion. Like, yeah, like there's a whole ends off with his like stupid gate, whatever, and room and jailer. I don't feel like those were secret phases. I feel like in order for it to be a secret mythic phase, it has to be like something epic and something like phase.
So you're saying there hasn't been a good one since Legion?
Sure, however you want to put it,
fair.
but I just feel like they're just straight up not even like real secret phases. It has to be something that like like if you're watching it in the Race to World First for the first time ever, it has to be like holy or like this is like insane.
Yeah,
I mean, secret phases have always been like this little addition at the end of the fight that's not hard. None of them have ever been hard. They're like the easiest part of the fight. It's just like a extra little thing for you to figure out at the end. I guess like I'm pretty sure like for example the only reason the one in Legion was cool was because Illidan was in it. Like I don't think it was any better of a phase than like the end of Jailer, right? It was just Illidan was there and that went hard as fuck.
Yeah, it's got to be a spectacle.
Yeah, and maybe that's why they do them so infrequently. Dranos, what did you think about it?
Yeah, I do think that this wasn't like Gallywix wasn't a secret phase. It was a secret boss or like a different boss, but it wasn't. I do agree with you as well, Dorky, that like I don't think that it doesn't count. Like I don't think the Jailer one doesn't count, but I don't think the Jailer one is worth doing. I don't think they should do secret phases where it's like this is like I think the secret phases should be entirely designed from the perspective of like if somebody who hasn't played WoW in 3 years is tuning into the Race to World First and sees the moment of like Illidan dropping out of the crystal and they're like, holy fuck, this is poggers. That should be the goal for any secret phase. So like Gallywix should have done like he should have like jumped into the middle of his room for a secret phase and then like you chase him down there and he's got a big cannon aimed at Stormwind that you gotta like you gotta blow up before he blows it up or whatever. Like there's gotta be something like that where it's got like an epic narrative component to it. Because I do think that the like little like, oh, we're going to the Heart of Azeroth chamber and then we're coming back out, or like, oh, the Jailer he's putting his hands in his there and he's maybe healing or maybe not if you're really smart, and then you're doing a little bit more of a phase like that. I don't think it's really worth doing. I do think that the idea of doing end bosses that are different on Mythic than Heroic, which is what Gallywix was, right? Gallywix, I would agree with you, Max, wasn't a secret phase. I do think that's poggers and very cool if they make a fun Mythic fight. And there are maybe Mythic fights you can make that you can't make on lower difficulties, right? Like there are Heroic bosses. There are mechanics and like fight designs that just would not work on a lower difficulty that can exclusively be done on Mythic that they maybe would never get to if they did the usual process of upscaling a Heroic boss. But Gallywix wasn't that, right? Like the Gallywix Mythic fight could easily be a Heroic.
Yeah, in fact, I would argue it's better. I think the Gallywix Mythic fight is actually just better than Heroic. It's a better fight.
Yeah, I mean, Heroic has like a weird mechanic of the floor turning into lava when you deposit, but you just don't deposit enough times for that to matter unless you accidentally double deposit.
Like, it almost seems like the Mythic one was the one they had in mind, and they like kind of made it easier for Heroic. I would love to ask them about that. My secret phase thing is, I think all secret phases, not for one, have never, and this is not known to the viewers, but has never been a secret. So it's never, ever, ever a secret when you get there. You know basically everything the phase does, and you just need to see it all put together, kind of. So that's one part of it. Number two, I think they're just super overrated because they're not like this crazy thing. Like they're just usually super easy. So I like if you have a choice between doing what you did on Gallywix for like a secret phase, which basically everything on the boss, to be honest with you, is a secret. Like even P1s in the journal, but like the way the ads worked and how they spawned and already being on the bridge and stuff like that stuff's weird. Like that was basically could have not been in the dungeon journal, would have been the same thing. And then everything from 70% basically to 0 is all a secret. It's all none of it was known at all. You just had to like see it and figure it out. And that, if you're going to do anything secret, I love the idea of just the whole boss being secret, honestly, because like the boss wasn't hard enough for people to like really care about that, and I also think going dark hurt that a lot. And it's kind of bad for viewership in general. But like if people would have saw us get to that past the part you see in the dungeon journal like live, I think that would have been like insane. That would have been so cool. But like hearing us react to that and problem solve it, which you got to see most of that last day, but like the initial hype of it was known before that. So I think it's really cool. I think they should. I think it can be easy to be like that didn't work from Blizzard's end, but that's not always why it didn't work. I think a lot of things, if you want to say it didn't work, could be talked about. But I think what they did on the boss was like really cool, and like it wasn't punishing enough, but it was still just a really good boss. It's a good boss. Like you're not going to kill Gallywix and not like it really, unless you're like a Race World First guild and you're like, man, I wish this was way harder, right? But like I think it's like generally a pretty good fight.
Yeah, that part is actually so true. You were saying how like you found it really fun doing Gallywix figuring out for the first time, and honestly, I think that's been the sentiment for a lot of this raid. Like, not the figuring out part, but these fights in general have just been pretty enjoyable. Like, I think this might be the most fun raid in a while. Might be kind of crazy to say because I'm not normally the guy about to say like, oh, this raid is poggers or whatever. But this might actually be one of the more fun raids in a very long time. And
well, that's
I'm
not
glad
surprising to
Blizzard is
me
doing that.
to hear that from you, because it sounds like your experience in raiding is like you enjoy raiding and figuring out bosses, but there's just like a critical mass of how many pulls you can do before it's super bullshit annoying and gets old. And you just have been killing good bosses that I think are pretty well designed, and they've never reached that point, right? And it's possible by the time you get to Muggsy, you might not reach that point then either. And then it's just going to be a whole raid of like an ideal pull count for you. Or most people.
I bet you're not going to like One Armed Bandit. I think that
Well,
that boss is going to raise the bullshit meter for a lot of guilds.
I hope not. Yeah, so far it's been
why
like
is
that's
that?
whatever. It's not the worst. Yeah, why is
Like
that?
the fight is very at least in my guild is pretty unpopular, and maybe it's just because we've been playing kind of bad on it, but like a lot of just like randomly getting one shot by a coin or a tornado rolling through you, and like you're getting gripped around, and there's like a mechanic vomit thing, and you have to be baiting as well. Like you constantly have to be baiting coins, and having all 20 people baiting is something where like if it's not, then it's going in a bad spot and things get ugly. So I suspect that one's going to be more frustrating for people to prog than its difficulty would suggest, especially because it also has the class stacking premium where Shadow Priests are basically 50% more valuable than like any other spec on that fight, because they just nuke those real assistants in a way that, like, if you're not playing with 3 Shadow Priests, you're gonna have to make serious concessions to actually be able to kill those things on time, at least for another couple weeks probably.
Yeah,
hopefully they act fast. Yeah, I mean, I'm playing a range, so I don't even know what's happening in that fight. I'm gonna be honest. I'm kind of just like hitting stuff and dodging stuff and jumping out for the debuff. I don't even know what the hell the coin mechanic is.
Yeah, I mean, this might just be the whole "this is the worst boss ever, this is the worst boss ever, you kill it, okay, that was pretty good" thing happening for me. But as of right now, it's been some frustrating progression. And I know that with Sprocket that wasn't true. With Sprocket progression, we were like, oh my god, raid is over already? Okay, I can't wait for raid to happen again.
Are you using our strat?
Yeah.
Okay, I wonder, because like we never really had to talk about baiting. Things just like kind of naturally got baited just from like the way you move things. Like we didn't talk about baits; they just happened.
It was more so melee. Like melee had to not be completely off to the side.
Yeah, melee have to like always be in the middle of the room side of the boss.
Yeah, but I mean, if you tank the boss a certain way, that's the only place you can be, I guess. But the that boss is another one where it's just like it's designed for the first people who kill it are just gonna have way more fun, because there's so many options of when you can do everything on that fight, and coming up with the right one just adds a lot of like, you guys never think about that once. You're just like, right, okay, yeah, we know the order, right? We just do the order. But like the whole process of finding the order is really, really fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting to like understand, like, okay, we're doing the hardest ad set first so that we can get it out of the way and like line it up with some CDs or whatever, right? And like that's the unCCable set, and then these things line up here or whatever.
For fun, do you know why we chose the order we did? Like logically? Did I ever say that?
The first one spawns the easiest coil to click and clear ground with, and then the last 2 spawn the last coils that are more annoying, and every time the boss phases it activates every coil, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the main logic is like, why would you ever do more coils? Because they're the only ones of every order that continue to do mechanic for the rest of the fight. Fun story, we did this on PTR. The reason why you have to delay until at least the 6th one is down is the boss in Mythic actually puts them in the middle of the room. So if you get to like the last phase, if you haven't done Shock and Bomb and Shock and Flame yet, he just like smacks them in the middle, and it's like super annoying to play around. So like that's actually why you had to delay. And we actually considered if we had more damage, we would have moved our thing forward to like make sure we could at least place them and like hopefully skip like coin and bomb, which is like obviously the worst one. But yeah, and then the other ones were just like when they lined up with CDs, I guess.
Yeah. Fun. It's that side of the fight's kind of fun, and I don't know, I've been enjoying playing it as well, but like it's one of those bosses where it's just like, oh, somebody's dead, and that's like frustrating. I don't know. Hopefully that's just maybe we had 10 or 20 bad pulls or whatever where
so
people lock in.
On the topic of like continuing to nerf, if you think Mugsy is something that should be nerfed, because like Mugsy, yeah, we killed it 150, but like we have the ability to run 5 monks and 2 warlocks and 3 mages, and like a lot of people aren't gonna be able to do that. And like you need a certain amount of classes that can go into the cages to be able to do that consistently. And to have some other classes do it, it requires almost frame perfect grips and rescues to get people not stuck in jails for a long time. So I think Blizzard kind of only has one thing they can do. I think like almost immediately they need to change that fight to when you kill the goons, the knockback happens, and just like on heroic, it breaks the walls. I think it has to happen. Like because other than that, the comp requirement is so extreme that people are going to get to a boss that wouldn't be unfair for them with the right comp, but it's completely unreasonable to expect that they do.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that, because I don't think it changes too much to do that, really. Like, it just means that you don't have to do all this nonsense.
Yeah, no, you would just make sure the knockback happens where it's not, and you could kill them way faster to get them out of the way. Right. Make sure that everyone gets knocked back the same direction, so you don't break too many walls, so you still have the ability to like shoot the things through it. Because like I think the intended idea for Mugsy is people randomly get picked. It can't pick healers, and you're just supposed to stay in there and like kill it efficiently enough to where you can just get let out by the icicles later. Or in the last phase, you can get let out by the hot mess. But that's like that was completely not viable for us to do that. It required porting classes for consistency. But as you guys gain way more damage and gear, like maybe it's okay to actually just have people AFK in the jails after they kill that ad until whenever. Maybe that's also true. I'm not sure. It just sounds really bad. Sounds like really bad.
I am not looking forward to Mugsy after all of this talk about it. I was just talking about how like good Raid is, and with how one Armed Bandit and Mugsy are sounding, maybe it's not going to be that great.
It's too much healing too. Like that's a fight where like in its current form, I think
phase, right?
I think it's even by really good guilds, I think it might be like unhealable. It's just too much damage at the end.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean the 3% healing buff is definitely, if the 3% damage and healing is going to be very nice for that spot, and the extra gear and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I would say don't let Mugsy and One Arm Talk get you too down, because I think there's a good chance the help is on the way for at least Mugsy. I think I would be surprised if they don't nerf that soon. And then Bandit, I don't know, Bandit might just be my take, not the that might not actually be how most people experience it, and that might not even be how I remember it in a week's time. Just as of right now, that's how I'm feeling about that fight.
Yeah, it is something I'm seeing more of tonight. Like, we did get a good amount of pulls in Bandit, but we're continuing that. One of my guildies actually said it the best. Like, so my guild was talking about the difficulty curve, and some of the raiders are the ones who are kind of like you, Jones, where they want like sepulcher difficulty. They want shit ton of pulls on a lot of bosses, and then one of them was like,
I don't want sepulcher difficulty every tier, but
okay, but I mean, you did say sepulcher was one of your preferred.
I personally, but like that's like a guilty pleasure. It's like I want ice cream for dinner
that's fair.
Night, right?
I think that's completely fair.
Yeah.
But yeah. So one of my guildies said it the best, because I felt that way too. He was saying how like he doesn't care if these bosses don't take more than 100 pulls as long as they're fun, and like so far they have been fun. And I actually completely agree with that. Like, as long as they can just continue to make these fights fun and where you can actually feel the entire progression of the fight, then I think it's a good boss. Because we've just had too many bosses that were either, all right, you one shot them and they don't really do a whole lot, or you're stuck at them for 300 plus pulls, and that's been like literally the past since like Sylvanas. It's just a bunch of bosses that kind of fell over, and then you get to Tindril or Farrak or Silken Cord, Ovanax, etc. It just doesn't feel good when it's like that.
Yeah, this raid's gonna feel good in that way. Although I do think the whole like next raid's gonna be super hard thing is I think you can bet on that. Like here's like I mean I made the take before this that most of Blizzard's changes as far as bosses raids being easier or harder or whatever is like pretty reactive. And like this raid, no matter how they got there, kind of proves that, right? Like last raid, bosses 3 and 4 were too easy. This raid, bosses 3 and 4 were like way harder. They even mentioned in interviews like part of the issue of Brood Twister was Sikran and Rashinan. So okay, so they did that. That probably too much, but they
I
certainly
think they've nerfed
tried.
him to a pretty good spot now. Yeah.
Yeah, but like for the race, for example, like
Yeah.
that was clearly an intention. Okay, and then bosses 5 through 8. So the last 4 bosses in Nerebar Palace were all harder than the last 4 bosses of this raid, right? So you could say that was maybe who knows if that was on purpose, especially with Gallywix, but like that was true with every single one of those fights. So like kind of like a snapback from where we were. So the next raid, I don't know if it's going to be boss by boss the same, but they literally released a Race to World First like historical video they had made, and they used it as marketing materials to be like, you guys should really watch the race this time, like really pumping up Gallywix, which I mean probably could have worked if the boss was harder. I think there was a lot of cool stuff about the boss, but like I think they massively missed out by like pumping up the last boss so much, and there was just no viewership for it. That doesn't make, when you market something, that's not what you want to happen, right? I think next raid, if I could bet anything, I would bet that the end boss of the next raid is going to be absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Like
Because like there
err
are
on the-
bosses that are randomly hard, right? Like Halandris or whatever, where you don't know in advance they're going to be hard in Poggers to watch. But like the end boss is always the one that has all that expectation on its shoulders, right? Yeah.
the next boss is going to be if they're going to miss on the next boss, it's going to be it being absolutely unbelievably hard rather than the opposite.
That's probably
Which-
gonna happen.
I think again, like if that happens for the Race to World First, that's kind of fine, right? If it's like a 5-day end boss instead of a 3-day end boss for the race, okay, like that might even be good for the Race to World First. It's just they, like Dorki said, right? Like that we're kind of then putting our trust in them to actually nerf it appropriately and swiftly for everybody else. And if they fail to do that, then
I mean, how many examples have there been of them nerfing an unbelievably difficult boss to correct levels for the people that are getting to it in enough time, right? Isn't it normally
maybe Sprocket and Stix, right?
Yeah, maybe this tier, exactly. Like, but before this tier, I feel like that's something that like basically almost never happens.
Yeah,
at least it doesn't seem that way. So like maybe they can commit to doing that if they want it to be way harder for the race.
Well, one thing I will say about this raid in particular is they've done a really good job at making the fights nerfable by gear and the raid buff. Because, we've talked about this in previous tiers. We talked about last tier, Silken Court. It didn't matter if your guild had infinite fucking gear. You still had to do the dance. You still had to know the movement. And people were still spending hundreds of pulls progging that boss fight. But so far, it seems like these fights aren't like that. They are the type of fights that will just get a lot easier with a ton of gear. So I will say like that's one huge plus Blizzard has done. But at the same time, I am also very worried about next tier. I mean, I get it too. Like I understand why Blizzard cares so much about the Race to War First, or like why there's so many complainers about this raid, because I kind of like looked at the numbers, and I kind of came to the realization that there are just a lot more people who watch the race than people who actually do Mythic raid.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
And
that
fucking
is
sucks.
by far. Yeah, like there's like, I would be willing to say there's like tens of thousands of people more that watch the race than are people who are doing the raid and then also watching.
Yeah, because
And
I was looking at some of the numbers, and like last year, there was only like less than 2,000 guilds that have got to Silken Court. So compare that number to the Race to War First viewership, which is like, in the hundreds of thousands. It's not even remotely close, which is why there's just such a vocal group of people who are like, oh, like this raid was such a fucking disappointment, yada, yada, yada. But the problem is like these are not the people playing the game, and it just like fucking
Correct.
sucks for people who play the game. Like for people like me, I'm like out here Mythic raiding. I want the raid to continue being fun. I found this tier to be great, and everyone's just saying this tier sucks, and I'm like, what the fuck, man? Like
Not
I'm having a good
everyone.
time. Just okay, yeah, not
But
everyone, but like a
it
lot of
is
people, right?
those
Like it's
people. Like, I mean, if you think
Yeah.
about it, it's all logical. They get like what they really care about is they want to see like 2 guilds going head to head on the last boss, and that hasn't happened in
yeah,
2 raids. So they're like, I'm looking forward to this. Like, bro, this split shit has been annoying, but man, like we're about to fucking this is about to be the shit. Like both these guilds are killing Muggsy. This is about to get real, and then it's just over. And every bit of splits that they watched and went through is just like it wasn't even worth it. So their disappointment makes sense. And the reason why they always wanted to be super hard is because the downside of it being super hard is it's going to take a long time for you to kill that boss. But they don't have that downside because they're not playing
yeah.
the
They
game.
want to watch the suffer. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it's actually like OnlyFags, right? It's like nobody wants to play hardcore WoW, but like everyone wants to watch
Yeah.
these guys, like because it's exciting, you know, like it's a big event, and I totally get it.
What do you guys think about Heroic Week now that we had a tier with it and a tier without it?
So this is purely just race world first perspective. No heroic week is terrible for the race. Like it is, the class balance is so much worse. The boss tuning is so much worse. I mean, just and it's not like you have to be like, oh well, it's just like random that's happened. Like no, they get like an entire week to see heroic, and then afterwards you can still make changes. Turns out you're going to make a lot better educated decisions from Blizzard part as to like what's too good, what's not, how much damage are people actually doing this patch. They don't know. And the like abridged heroic week we do during Mythic, they can't make changes after that because we already like geared our characters and shit. So like they're like really, I think just basically they just need more information. And I'm not saying that's because they're really bad at their jobs. It's just like clearly balancing World of Warcraft is an incredibly hard thing to do, and they just need more information. Also, splits during the race. This is just a race specific thing. Turbo kills viewership. Like it annihilates viewership. People don't know when to tune in. My dad told me about that after the race. He's like, yeah, I found it really confusing when to tune in this time. And I'm like, yeah, because it is confusing, right? It's not like you're doing anything wrong. It's just like no one really knows, and that can make people tune out. As far as the rest of the game, I think most people benefit from like better tuning and stuff and not waiting until the race is over to get like proper class tuning and have bosses be easier. But like I don't think that affects a lot of people because they can just like nerf the bosses before they get to them. Like they have the bad boss tuning is like something that the race experiences. And I don't think people want to wait a week for Mythic Plus. I also think
That I think is the big thing. Yeah.
but then there's also like, can you mix the two together? Like there's a week when the patch first comes out that feels like there's nothing going on. I know we talked about before that like the reason that is because they don't want people to feel like they have to rush through the story to, you know, like start the gearing FOMO right away, and then like they miss all that stuff. So like that week makes sense for probably the majority of WoW players that are not often represented. But like for us, it just feels like that week doesn't make any sense. There's like nothing to do. So like maybe you could throw in some Mythic Plus or some heroic or normal or something in that week, right? To kind of like give you both. I'm not sure. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I think let's just do Heroic Week and let's just let M Plus also happen then. Like there's no huge problem anymore with M Plus gear. Like imagine if you could just do +10s during Heroic Week. What would you do? You'd do +10s and then you'd probably be fine, right? Like sure, you'd get some high hero gear. Maybe you don't drop the Ruined Crests or Gilded Crest yet that week, something like that. Like you still leave those.
You still need gear from Raid though. You need the Raid gear. Like the Mythic Plus gear isn't as good. They made sure that was the case this patch, right?
Like it genuinely wouldn't. If there was a Heroic Week and you could do +10s, like it wouldn't invalidate the Raid. They've made Raid rewards better, you know, than it was when I guess that was a concern. I think that you could do that and we could fix that downside, and then you could still have the upside of Heroic Week for the tuning in the race. Because it's not like Heroic Week griefs normal guilds at all, because the only guilds that are affected by the difference between a Heroic Week and a Mythic Week are guilds that would consider going into Mythic on week 1, which is not a lot of guilds. Like there's not a lot of guilds that are doing Mythic week 1 besides maybe First Boss or something like that. If you are a guild, you're like an AOTC guild and you decide after 6 out of 8 Heroic to go do Mythic Vexy instead, sure, that won't be an option for you week 1, but like it's other than that, it's just the M plus thing that griefs a lot of players, and there's just no need to because it doesn't do anything worthwhile. So that's my take. Let's just do Heroic Week and let's just give the M plus gear that week as well, and it'll be fine, I think.
Yeah, same take. I've heard AOTC guilds that have complained about like how having M plus early kind of like
Yeah.
invalidates raid, but I don't agree with it. And yeah, I mean, I do think like regardless, they do need to have M plus coming out at the same time. Because can you guys imagine this patch if there was that whole week of nothing to do and then another week of like M
Yeah.
plus not being out? Holy hell, the complaint would go crazy.
Especially because you could get hero gear from delves and not from keys.
Also,
Yeah.
especially because there's no reason for Mythic Plus to not release with heroic raid. Like
Yeah.
it's just like even before they did simultaneous raids, it never like for many years it did not make sense to delay Mythic Plus. That was like I think just an error.
Yeah, I think Dorki is right that the fear is like if you're an AOTC guild and it's easier to get hero gear from keys than from the raid, is that like a prop? But like that's already true this week, right? That's already true on week 1 Mythic, where M plus is fully out the whole way, and heroic raid is out, and you could do either one. Which are you going to do? Like that decision calculus doesn't change at all based on whether Mythic is out that week or not. That it literally is irrelevant to that decision.
Yeah, Mythic Plus doesn't hurt splits at all because like the way you do Mythic Plus in that heroic week is you do all your splits, you'd find out your main, and then you would farm Mythic Plus on your main, but that's no different than what it is now. It's the same thing. You would just be getting more chores out of the way before Mythic.
Right, and then Mythic, you'd probably still see like 2 days of splits on week 1 Mythic, something like that. Like I don't want to pretend it wouldn't happen, but it would probably be like 1.5 to 2 days instead of 4.5 days or however many it was this tier.
And also you'd be sending your crests a lot earlier too. And like one thing that was weird about this raid is like we didn't spend our crests until the second reset. We didn't craft on a lot of people until the second reset.
So until the day before they gave you an extra spark and made all those decisions bad.
Yeah. But like think about like a Blizzardman's process of like tuning these bosses. They're looking at how much damage you can do, and they have no clue because at any given time, they're looking at, okay, this is how much damage they do. Oh, they haven't sent crests. Oh, they haven't crafted. How much damage are you going to get from that? Who knows? Like, genuinely, no one knows. Like, we don't know, right? It's just like you just get it, and then you kind of see you're like approximating how much damage you gain. But like, it makes it harder, so much harder for them to do their jobs by doing it the way they're doing it now.
Yeah, what about this, by the way? I've heard this before. I don't know if there's any downsides to it. What if there was no Mythic raid until 1 month after? And
I think that would be too long.
Well, so I mean, like that way, like everyone would just be like fully heroic geared up, and then you can just like do Mythic raid at that item level, and then you start.
Yeah, that's like
Final Fantasy.
It's like a Final Fantasy. It's going along the lines of stuff people have suggested before, where it's like Mythic is 1 difficulty, it's never nerfed, and then you go in with a level.
Well, no, I mean you would still be getting gear. It's just like there would be Myth track comes out on Mythic release, and then you would have like an entire month of like being able to properly tune classes, understand like how classes work on these fights, and just like not have to worry about splits. Like everyone's kind of, well, I mean, there's probably still be splits, but you would be able to acquire all of what you need.
There's one main reason this would never happen. You know what it is?
No, what is it?
It's for the same reason that AWC and MDI were just insanely too fast last patch. Because like all the like event stuff that advertises the game for them, it makes the most sense for that to happen as close to the beginning of the patch as possible. So when people are watching it and it's being advertised to them, they're like, oh, I can log in and play this game right now. Where if it was a month after it came out, they'd be like, I already kind of missed the season start, right? So I'm not going to play this thing. I would say it's probably just the pure proximity of this big viewership event happening late into the patch to where people wouldn't really realistically be able to start it. I feel like would make that never happen.
Well, wouldn't there also be like a heroic race? Now that I think about it, that would be kind of cool too.
Not really, I don't think.
Maybe for like a couple hours or something.
Yeah, like it wouldn't be NA serious, would win. Like
I think we'd be pretty good there.
I guess probably Echo would do their NA characters and compete with it, I guess.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
I forgot they did that. That was a time.
Oh, good bit.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean that does sound pretty cool. Yeah, so
on the heroic would have to be pretty different to be a meaningfully interesting race spot, though. I think.
Well, I mean, they could also have two. Yeah, like they could also have like heroic be a little bit more difficult, and then they just kind of because I mean, like remember Sepulchre heroic was pretty hard. Like that'd be kind of a good target.
I feel like Muggsy and Gallywix are already like hard enough for the average guilds in AOTC. They're pretty pretty beefy fights. Okay.
So about the M plus side of this season, Janos, you probably played a bunch yourself, right?
Yeah, I've done a bunch of keys. I don't know. I'm having fun on them. I'm having a good time. I've only tanked keys really so far. I've done a couple of DPS keys, but I like it. I like the dungeons. They've been nerfing them very rapidly in spots that needed it.
What's the
The
lore?
difficulty's definitely easier.
What's the
It's
lore
good.
of the season? Is it like what we talked about before, where they were just like, we've heard enough about dungeons are too hard. We're just gonna make sure they're way easier. Is that basically what's
I think
happening?
so, because
Yeah.
I think during week 1 they basically took a key level off of everything because they were like, whoop, it's still too hard. Okay, we're chopping a key level off of everything because they nerfed like damage and healing of mobs by 10% or something in dungeons. So yeah, I think their goal is for 10s to be dramatically easier than they were in previous seasons, or than they were last season, and I think they've succeeded. And I think it was a good thing they did.
To say. Yeah, it might be early to say, but I think this might be the best season in a very long time. It's actually looking really good so far. I think a lot of people have been having fun. Like, it's just a fun season. I don't know. Like, the season has just been good. Maybe it's just because of like class balance too. The fact that you can kind of play anything right now is just really good.
Oh, really?
'Cause
You can do
I've
that. That's cool.
yeah, I've always said that like WoW is super fun to play. The problem is you can't play a game because there's always shitty class balance or just whatever gatekeepy reasons. But right now it feels really good.
Dude, I just went to Raider.io to check how like diverse the runs were, and there's just the biggest ad on Raider.io. It's like my entire screen. That's crazy for a cereal. Wow. Okay.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, I saw that too.
We got to get them to sponsor us. Hang on.
Yeah. Yeah, I was about to say, I was wondering how like varied it was, because like when I was doing the race, I'm just like, dude, Fire Mage has to be just completely absurd in dungeons. But I wonder how true that is on the leaderboards here. It looks like there's some non-mage groups. There's like a Hunter Warrior Rogue group that's doing pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, to be
Yeah.
fair, it's early season, so people.
It always
can't
does look more
really-
diverse early season.
Yeah, we probably will see a whole lot more majors as the season develops.
Oh, DK is good. That's fascinating. When was the last? And Moonkin. That's okay. So like, it seems like Moonkin DK is a pretty good comp to go with Mage. That's fascinating because Moonkin and DK are both stinky in Raid.
Yeah,
like-
I play them both in Raid, and they're the worst fucking specs.
Yeah, they
in the
stink.
game
They're
right
like, I mean, they're obviously viable. It's just that like basically every melee, but definitely DK is just like a 10% worse Windwalker, and Moonkin is like an unplayable raid spec unless a fight is entirely designed for their niche, which did exist this tier. But like they just have to choose between AoE and single target, and anytime that's the case, as a class, you're cooked by classes like Mage that are doing their full single target on a boss and doing infinite cleaved ads around them. You can't compete with that. So it's just a fundamental class design issue with Moonkin, or their single target talents aren't good enough when they actually want to, or they struggle with talents to find a way to mix the single target and AoE rather than playing full Bernardio build.
And this is why they
not
can't buff
Bernardio
them,
build.
right? Like they're not easy to buff. Because if your class doesn't have a niche like that and it's underperforming in Raid, it gets buffed. But
Yep.
Moonkin and Unholy, they can't get buffed easily because then they'll become even more OP and M+, right? So like
Yeah.
they have to
That's gonna
actually
happen for
really
sure.
think about how to buff them. And
Also, the fact that
do-
Windwalker isn't good in Mythic Plus is fascinating because Windwalker is unbelievably cracked in Raid. They are by far the best melee, and they have they're not good at Mythic Plus purely due to target capping. That is
Yep,
that
target
is
cap.
like that is insane that is the case. Like I cannot remember a class ever being this good at in like if you were to make a Mythic Plus boss in Raid, right? Like you're basically like Brood Twister, like Windwalker's okay, like a little bit too high target count, but like basically 5 target cleave on a boss all the time. Like
I mean,
Stone
Stix
Legion
was kind of like that.
yeah, like Stone Legion Generals was like the OG like Mythic Plus boss. You were just like constantly AoE and group of things. Like Windwalker would top on these fights, but in Mythic Plus they're not good enough because they can't hit 20 targets, right? I think they're almost like 5 target cap.
Yeah,
right?
they're straight up
With
5
spinning crank
targets.
kicks. Yeah, which is huge weird problem. Also, how do you guys feel about not to take it away from Mythic Plus media, but how do you guys feel about like niches being back?
I don't like what it's doing to like class stacking in the Raid. I don't like that.
That
at
is the
all.
direct result. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like dots are back. Like dots for the first time since BFA, dots are back straight up, and that is like clearly. I mean, what would happen to BFA? You stack daughters on fights that did that. Like Execute, they created fights. Execute's always been here, but they created fights where it mattered. I don't know. It just seems it's really different. It's like clearly an emphasis of theirs.
I think it's one of those, it has to feel good, but it shouldn't be required, which is a really hard line to cross. But yeah, I mean, I also feel that way, Drynus. Like, I don't really like how dependent this raid is on specific damage profiles. And yeah, I mean, the whole target capping is a huge problem. I feel like target capping has not once achieved their goal. They really need to do away with target capping. I can already see the next week, assuming there's tuning happening, going really poorly for what's gonna happen to Raid and M+.
Dude,
Like,
Windwalkers as well. Windwalkers are gonna get taken out back.
Windwalker,
they're just not gonna get uncapped. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Like, they're not even that good in M+, and then they're just gonna get cut in half. Mistweaver Monks too. That's gonna get cut in half probably. And then there's like Fire Mage. Oh, well, Fire Mage needs to get nerfed. And then we have like Boomkins and Unholy DKs that are
they can't buff them easily.
Bro, if they make
they can't buff them, but they're gonna get buffed.
If they make Moonkin and Blood DK, or if they make Moonkin and DPS DK worse because of Mythic Plus, they're going to be the most unplayable dog shit. And like, think about it. What is the main difference between Raid and Mythic Plus? Like, in every Raid tier, there are cleave bosses. It's just Mythic Plus increases the target count to far more than you would ever have on like a hard Raid fight. So that's why it's so hard to balance between the two. You know, like back in the day, they used to do changes for classes for years, and it would affect PvP and PvE, even though it was only one of the modes in which they were actually tuning it. And it just was part of the game. And then eventually what happens now, and for many years now, is when they nerf something in PvE, it just doesn't affect PvP. Or if they make a PvP specific change, it doesn't affect PvE. You could almost look at Mythic Plus and Raid like that, in that they just, if you remove target capping, you're removing the thing that makes it different to Raid and Mythic Plus. And I'm assuming target capping, there's some other reasons. Like maybe it's some performance thing. Like maybe if you're like everyone in the game is not target capped, then it's just like infinite events and lag, and maybe that's like a thing. But like, at least for the pure gameplay side of things, I think not having everyone just like soft targeted at 20, which is like pretty basic, seems like it's a pretty big mistake, because clearly Mythic Plus pulls get that big.
Okay, we gotta wrap up shortly as Dorki's raid is about to begin. So let's do our Patreon question and then depart, as time flies. But yeah, it's now closing in on Dorki's raid time. So here's our Patreon question this week. Comes from McQuack. It says, a conversation that popped up in my guild Discord after I randomly saw Scott on the Gallywix Mythic Mount in town. What do Race to World First Raiders do during the tier after the race is over? One person brought up, why even bother, because Raiders are near Abyss after 1 week of splits. My thought was gear up buckets to make splits smoother, or does it make money from sales to pay for the next race? Really curious how it goes on all levels. Pod, thanks.
Very miserable, that's what.
Yep, there is a lot of, you want every single character to be full or close to full bis for next tier. It's going to be a little bit less painful this tier because we know Dinars are coming, right? So you will be able to get the 2 items you're least lucky on per character. But yeah, like that and sales are definitely a part of it. Obviously, Max will know the most as the Race to World First person here.
Yeah, so after some tiers, like right now, I doubt there's a lot of Mythic Plus sales because they made Mythic Plus a lot easier. But on tiers where it was harder, you made absolutely insane gold from being like putting liquid in the title and selling like runs for gold. It would be, I remember Shaq made like 100 million gold within, I think it was 1 or 2 weeks of either Vault or Aberrus being out. And they were just doing carries all day for just an absurd amount of gold, like probably 1 million a run or something like that, split between them. So that's one thing. So that's just to generally simplify it. It's like you definitely make gold. Like we're starting sales as soon as possible because you need, we've spent like roughly 1 billion gold this time. So you need to make all that gold back. And then it's just about gearing characters. So like not only having geared characters to potentially gear in the new raid, but for splits, like all of our players have 1 million characters, you need splits to go. Did you guys watch One Armed Bandit on the first day before Pug started getting more gear? Like, that was hard. You want that to be as easy as possible. That saves you time that you could spend in Mythic. So basically all of farm is just doing a bunch of runs and gearing a shitload of characters while also trying to make our players not hate their lives. Which is hard because it's like, I mean, I know they're getting paid for it, but it's like very repetitive and monotonous. I mean, we typically never raid more than like 2 nights a week for farm. It's like 2 4 or 5 hour raid nights. It's not a ton, but it's a lot of total runs. Like, I wonder how many times we killed Queen Ansorek on Mythic. It's probably, I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. So yeah, it's just a lot of work. A lot of players usually have another game they want to play. You know, as much as we all love WoW, you know, once you do the race, it's hard to be like, I want to push #1 Mythic Plus, because like it all seems insignificant after the race. It's weird. You like do this big thing at the very beginning, and then it's just like, well, I'm done with the thing, you know. And you need to gear characters, but a lot of times you put your passions into other things to keep sharp while maintaining your WoW characters. So I'd say it's a healthy amount of break plus gearing up your stable of characters for next raid.
Yeah, I'm friends with a lot of Liquid players, and what I've learned is that they're all soulless.
Yeah,
straight up. It's funny because like it seems like we used to have a lot of passion. I've noticed for like just playing the game in general, but like outside of the race, it seems like they're just not too interested in really doing anything else. Like I've tried getting these guys to do M plus, do like other shits, but a lot of them really just they do their chores in game and then they're off to play other games. Like a lot of them are actually playing Cata Classic, and I'm sure a lot of them are like super hyped for Mop Classic. I don't know what it is about those versions of WoW that they like so much, but most of them are playing that. And there's like other games too, like THD and Goop. They're playing Lost Ark and stuff.
Lost Ark, yeah. I mean, it's basically like you're mixing your hobby and your passion and your job. Like at a certain point, like if you wonder what paying our players does, I would say it never gets us a new player. Like no one's like, I want to do the race because I want to make money. You know, they're at this point out of pure passion. It's the only way you could get this good. But what it does do is keep your players, because when you're in farm and you're like, I'm having to like maintain 15 characters for something I'm going to do 5 months from now. Maybe at some point when we're doing 5 months from now, it doesn't add up to that. Like you need to make that deal seem sweeter, and paying them certainly helps. Like I would bet our turnover in farm would be higher purely from just how annoying this shit is and how annoying it's gotten. But, people do it. Yeah, I mean, then getting passionate about other games really helps, right? Because it's like, okay, if like the race was at the end of the patch, I bet you would see a lot of people diving into Mythic Plus and like doing all like, I just want a game, But like, it's so weird and almost anticlimactic to have the entire 5-month patch, the thing that you care about the most, to happen immediately. Because it's just, it's so hard to ramp yourself up to care about anything else when like the next time it happens is a new patch. It's like you basically complete the patch. You're speed running completing the patch. And it's hard to get invested into other parts of the game after you've done the thing. I think that's a large part of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's just, you've literally done the WoW is all about like gearing up for the next challenge and then doing it, right? And you just do all that in the first 2 weeks and then it's over. So then you kind of are shifting to gearing up for the next challenge, which is next patch, right? So you have all patch to prep for that.
And it's like difficulty, right? So doing mythic bosses as you go and farm and as you get more and more gear becomes easier and easier. There's nothing in the game that's even remotely comparable to how difficult a like end boss, a non-Gallywix end boss, or a second to last boss normally is. Like that's a level of like gameplay that you cannot reach in this game in PvE unless you're doing that. So another thing is you like reach up to this point, you kill these bosses, then it's like, okay, if you could repetitively get that feeling of like progressing super hard bosses for a whole patch, maybe you would, but you can't, right? Like the thing that you replace it with is Mythic Plus, which can be challenging, but it's much more repetitive, and what it's asking of you is not as much. So it's I think, at least this is how I felt when I played. Like I just couldn't get into the game because it felt like it wasn't satisfying what I needed from it after the race is over. So you feel empty and soulless, as he's saying.
Yeah.
All right, on that note, we are going to be done for this week. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you next week. Adios.
Audio.